we always do it this time. I go for mine, I get to shine. Now throw your hands up in the sky.
Hey, I gotta cut that off because they will block my video.
Gotta tell the story, Doc.
What's going on, y'all? You're listening to the Tell the Story Doc podcast, or maybe you're watching it on YouTube. This podcast is about church planting. It's about urban leaders. It's about persisting in ministry. It's about all of those things. It's about telling the story of church planters, pastors, and leaders who are doing dope things in this earth, trying to glorify Jesus. So today, I hope you rock with us through the entire episode so that you can hear why we need to tell the story, Doc. I want to hear a guy who's struggling to figure out what the mission of his church plan is going to be. Like, let's have that conversation.
Exactly. Yeah, because now you can see the rise of these dudes coming out of obscurity or whatever.
Yeah.
And all the pressures and stuff that they're going through.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So I'm like, yeah, because nobody's documented that journey well yet.
But the third episode is going to be called The Story Needs to Be Told. And that's going to be the introduction to why we're doing the podcast. It's like, yo, we're going to this new format and we're doing this podcast because everybody needs to hear the stories. Like, you got to tell the story. So Tell the Story, Doc is not original at all. Man, so in this church planting ministry world, we still, that's what we do. We borrow, we steal, we take whatever we can. And man, the funny thing about how Tell the Story Doc came about is it really started as just a bit of wisdom that a friend gave me. And that bit of wisdom grew into almost like a friendship. It grew into a friendship that still lasts to this day. So, you know, I got part of this vision from you, but like, I think this is what we've been dreaming about for a long time. I mean, we had that conversation in 15, 16? You know, so, you know, I don't think anything has changed since then. You know, like, actually, I think things have gotten worse because I think there was a wave where people were trying to produce content, but then they kind of backed off. I don't know if it's because of pandemic or because the race stuff or maybe the platforms aren't there, but we just got to create our own platform. 2015, there was a Acts 29 conference that was in Orlando. Excuse me, it was not Acts 29. It was Exponential. It was an Exponential conference in Orlando, Florida. And all of these church planters and leaders and all that stuff are there. And as we are there, there's something that happens every time church planters of color get into a room together. They just kind of like peep each other. You're like, yo, okay, there go another dude. There go another black dude, you know, because it's only 7 of us or at the time. See, like y'all new church planters, I'm saying this like I've been church planting forever, but some of the people who church planting now, there's way more diversity. But in 2015, it was not like that. In 2015, it might have been 7 of us in most conferences. If it was a large conference, it might be 25 of us. But if it was a smaller one, it was like 5 to 7 of us in the room at one time. And if it was 5 to 7, that might have been a big deal. But I remember going to this conference and seeing other black church planters. And at the time, our sending church was a predominantly white church. And I didn't have any other church planters in the area that I could connect with. And I definitely didn't have any black ones that I could connect with or brown ones that I could connect with. So when I saw these guys, I immediately thought to myself, yo, I got to go talk to these guys to kind of get their opinions or their thoughts about this whole church planting thing. And then there was also around that time, this wave of guys who were connected to Eric Mason and the ministry of Epiphany Fellowship up in Philadelphia. And for a guy who was just kind of a spectator like me, I admired what was going on there. So I remember at the end of the conference, we were all talking about our plans for the night. And I began talking to this guy who was this tall, you know, big guy who was planting a church in Baltimore, Maryland. And I'm talking to this guy. I'm just telling him about, you know, my desire, my vision for planting a church in Daytona Beach. And he is just kind of a few steps ahead of me. So he's kind of giving me game on a few things. And then he brings up the topic of media. He brings up the topic of media and the internet and how black and brown people consume so much media. And he's going, like spitting game. And I'm just soaking it all in. And me having a background in public relations and advertising and media, multimedia, all that stuff. I'm taking mental notes. I even think I took some notes on my phone at the time. And then he says something to me that I will never forget. He says, hey, look, we see all of these churches and all of these ministries and we hear about how they got there, but nobody actually tells us how they really got here. We don't know the secrets of all of these things. So when we're doing this, we can't just hold back.
You gotta tell the story, Doc.
You got to tell the story about how these things are happening. And boom, it hit me. At that point, there was many people telling stories about church planting, but they were always telling them retrospectively. It was the guy whose church had grown to 1,000 who was telling young church planters, hey, make sure you cultivate your relationship with the Lord and make sure you have a good marriage and make sure you have good relationships with other believers and your leaders in the church. But they tell you that 15 years later, after their church is successful, they don't tell you what it's like in the moments where they're actually planting the church. They don't show you what it's like in the day that the person quits your church because there's another church down the street that's going to do it better. They don't tell you what it's like when you make a ministry mistake and you have to go back and try to correct those things, and those things still don't happen well. They don't go over well. It's very few people, especially at the time, that would look at you and explain the hardness of the seasons they were going through at that very moment and tell you the story as it was going on, include the details of the story as it was happening. What's going on, y'all? Y'all are halfway through the podcast, but what I would love for you to do right now is to subscribe to my channel. Subscribe to this channel and also look up Tell the Story Doc on Spotify. Subscribe there as well. And if you look it up on Apple Podcasts, subscribe there. Thank you for listening. Now let's get back to the rest of the podcast.
Peace.
So as I'm talking to this guy who is Charlie Mitchell, it becomes clear to me that our generation has an opportunity. See, with Vine and Instagram Live and TikTok and Twitter and even YouTube, there are people all around the world who are telling you their story as it's going on. There are people vlogging their stories as they're going on. They're not waiting until things happen well. They are giving you the good, the bad, and the ugly. And in the Christian space, we have to get more okay with telling the stories as they're happening. Like not waiting until everything works out, or not waiting until you go on to your next ministry opportunity and then you go on a book tour to talk about your last ministry opportunity. And there's something about that transparency of displaying a bit of the things that are happening as you are living it. Now listen, I understand wisdom. I understand that we shouldn't tell everything about every season, about every relationship, about all the time, because what that could do is bring people into a part of our lives that might not be quite ready for that. They might not be called to even experience that. But for church planters, for leaders, for pastors who know that there are other men and women who are trying to figure it out, why wouldn't we share game? Why wouldn't we want to give people an opportunity to experience what's going on while it's going on? This is why we have Tell the Story Doc. It's so that ministry leaders, pastors, people who are just sitting on the pews, people who may not even be Christians can get a true idea of what it's like to see a church planted, to see a church grow, to see, for some of us, churches close, for people to hear the stories about how to make that hard decision to close a church or fire an elder or put somebody under church discipline. Maybe not that. That might be a little bit too far. But the real parts of ministry, the parts that I think for a long time we were ashamed of. And it's not our fault. It's probably because most of us grew up with parents who were like, man, there are certain things you just don't talk about. And that's cool. If you want to preserve that right, I believe that you should preserve that right. However, know that the people who you are ministering to, they're living their entire lives open to the world. The direction we're going to is a direction where people have more and more questions about how things work. They don't just want to hear you talk at a marriage conference. They want to see that your marriage is actually working. They don't want to just hear you talk about spiritual rhythms. They want to actually interact with you as you're praying, as you are leading, as you are loving people, as you are meditating on the truths of God. They want to experience this with us. And that's why I believe every single ministry leader, person, and maybe even just person of faith should want to tell the story.
Right. Well, so that's why I'm like, I don't want the maroon or whatever it is to turn into. It's not a network of churches, but for right now, it just needs to be a platform that we all tell this story of what it's like to be a Christian in our day from our culture. You know what I'm saying? It's just like, yo, we're in the same boat. We're saying the same thing in different contexts, but we're struggling with a lot of the same issues. And it's just not becoming clear. You know what I'm saying? And it's part of it is just because there's not a shared language. It's not a shared conversation. It's in isolation. It's more of a need than what I even anticipate. You know what I'm saying? Like it's hitting a deeper heartfelt level than what I thought was just gonna be like, yo, we just need a break. But it was just like, nah, it's something deeper here. There's a much deeper connection that we have and we sense and we feel that I even anticipate. You know what I'm saying? And so I'm like, okay, now that we need to package that, whatever that is. With you doing the tell a story, Doc, and just involving more people into the process, it automatically elevates the game because it's like, yo, Byron, once we get a few episodes under your belt again, like just a few more reps in, now we got a proof of concept to say, yo, you know what I'm saying? We're going to do a whole season with a bunch of church planners, and then, man, we already be preparing for that fourth season where we're going to go through and talk to the OG. Bro, we got to record them stories before they're going.
Maybe we can create that space for them to tell their story so they can open themselves up to better opportunities. You know, like I told you before, part of your dream, part of my dream is that the next generation of church planners, like, that come after us don't have to go through some of the channels.
All the stuff we went through.
Exactly. You know what I mean? I want to talk to a young church planner about how to utilize the tech space and crypto and NFTs and all of that stuff and like the Connect and like the lab and all of those type things to be able to fuel their ministry so that they don't have to depend on these other parties that are going to be kind of like lording over the money. You know what I'm saying? So
right.
I think once we catch the OGs, like the first phase is kind of like us. The second phase is the OGs. The third phase is like, and maybe not even the third phase, but maybe sprinkled throughout is having conversations with young cats and young people who are doing new things in ministry and trying to help them, get a platform, while they're in this formation stage.
So by now you probably seen the Kanye West documentary, Genius. Oh man, I was floored by how dope that documentary was. I figured it was gonna be dope, but it brought out so many memories for me. I remember 2003, 2004 being in high school and knowing of Kanye West because of the beats he made for Rockefeller. I was a huge Rockefeller fan when I was a kid, and anticipating this album he was gonna put out, seeing the All Falls Down video, all that type stuff, and then actually hearing the album. My sister had a boombox with a CD player on it that was in like the corner of the room, and my parents weren't big on us listening to hip hop, so I would listen to it while they were still at work, while I was waiting on them to come home, and I would turn the joint way on high and listen to Kanye West's College Dropout album as soon as it came out. And when I was watching Genius, it just brought back all of those memories. It brought back a lot of memories too, because before, a lot of people don't know this, but before I wanted to be in public relations or advertising, way before I even had a clue about ministry, I wanted to be a music producer. I wanted to make music. When I was a junior in high school or a sophomore in high school, I got my first beat machine. When I was a junior, I got a Korg Triton keyboard, 88 key, or no, it was a 76 key. I couldn't afford the 88 key. And I made beats all through high school, and I sold those beats and all that stuff. So as I'm watching Kanye West in the studio making the beats for his first album, I was floored, because when you are a musician or working in a studio or whatever, you dream about what those sessions are like. Like, you think about, like, what are they doing when they coming up with this song or getting this feature or whatever it is. And we finally got to see the footage of that. But what blew me away even more than that, being somebody who had a background in music, is I also have a background in video production and editing and all that type of stuff. So to see these guys that had a vision to record Kanye West 20 years before this whole thing comes out just blew me. It blew my mind. I don't know if the creators of the Genius documentary knew that Kanye was going to become who Kanye is today, but I do know that they had vision that something was going on at that time, that there was something more that met the eye at that time. And this dude, Kanye West, was more than just your average rapper or your average producer. He was somebody worth zeroing in on and focusing in on so that you could get a true idea of what his story would be. Genius spoke to many of us because we love the idea of the stories being exposed, the things that we didn't know about. That's why people love E! True Hollywood Story. People love biopics. People love Lifetime, even though they come up with the wackest and wildest stories sometimes, because we imagine what things could have been like. But when we get the information, we get the truth about what things were actually like. See, the story and our imagination are actually joined together. They are not one in the same, but they fit with one another. They complement one another. Our imaginations are constantly moving, and our minds are constantly wondering about the people, about the things, about the movements that are happening in this world and happening in history. And when people tell the story, it fills those gaps. It settles our minds in a sense, but it also usually lends us to ask more questions. The reason why we're doing this podcast and the reason why Tell the Story Doc is a thing is because of that same curiosity and also that same desire to fill the gaps. I've noticed, just talking to church planters and pastors and people throughout all of this time that I've been dealing with ministry, that there is an image or an imaginary tale of how these churches come together, of how church plants start, about how movements happen, about how people are leaving the evangelical church and going back into some old churches that they were a part of, about the wave of Christian hip hop going into the reform space. People think that these things just happen, but there are bits of the story that need to be told to show us exactly how God was moving in those times. That's why we have Tell the Story Doc. And in the future, you'll hear the stories of more and more church planters and pastors who will answer the questions that maybe you've thought of before, or maybe they'll fill some of the gaps of how we got there. But I want to take a quick moment to tell you how I got here. So the rest of the episode, that's what you'll see or hear or experience. But no, whatever journey you're on, you got to tell the story, Doc.